Samson. Throw up a hand if you are familiar or heard of Samson. Yeah, Samson. I grew up in church. I was blessed to grow up in church, and I went to vacation Bible school. I went to Sunday school. I was involved a lot, and I remember Samson. I think we talked about Samson more than Jesus, if I remember right. That seems off. But we talked about Samson a lot. He was big and strong, and as a young boy, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be big and I wanted to be strong. Now the world, the Greeks and the Romans, they had their Hercules, and you might say that the Christians, the Bible people, had our Samson, right? They were kind of equals, these larger than life, super strong figures that could defeat any enemy. This was Samson. In fact, I remember as a kid, this activity that we did where we would get up front, we had 2 volunteers, everyone else had all these pieces of paper they would crumble up, and you had to shove those crumbled up pieces of paper underneath your shirt, and it would fill you out like you had big muscles, trying to be like Samson, and whoever had the best muscles won the activity. Of course, I've always had just natural muscles, and so I didn't need those. Yeah, okay. I think we're all there. Yeah, Samson was quite a familiar character in my life. So, of course, the question is, who is Samson? Who's Samson? Samson from the Old Testament. His story is told in Judges, chapter 13 through 16. And so to put his story in a little bit of context, if we could, the people of God, the Israelites, this family of Abraham, God's chosen people, they are enslaved in Egypt. Not the scripture yet. We'll get to that. We'll get to the scripture. We've got a few. The family of God, the Israelites, are enslaved in Egypt. And they get rescued out of slavery, and they get then into the wilderness. This through the story of Moses, through the Exodus. So then they're in the wilderness, and they're there for several reasons. They're there for 40 years. They wander the wilderness for 40 years. Eventually, they make their way into the promised land. This is the land of Canaan, the land that God had promised to Abraham several centuries earlier. This land that he was going to give the people. And so they finally make their way into the land. So now we've come through the first 5 books of the Bible, and the next book is Joshua. Joshua tells the story of the coming into the land and several battles that take place, because guess what? There were already people in the land. There were already other nations that stood against the Israelites, that stood against the people of God, and there were wars and battles. This is the story of Joshua. And then after Joshua, the next book is Judges. And so when they arrive, they fight all the battles they need to fight. They're there in the land. They've established themselves in the promised land, the land of Canaan. But they don't yet have a king. That would not come for a few centuries, about 350 years or so. They wouldn't get to the king where they'd eventually have King Saul and David and Solomon and so forth. And so for this intermediate time, this is the period of the judges. So the ruler of the land is not a king, but a judge, this larger-than-life figure, this great and strong figure that would judge the people, that would think through processes and how things are to be handled and what to do and not to do. There are these judges, and Samson is one of the judges. In fact, he's the 12th judge, and he serves for a period of 20 years. Samson, as he leads the people of Israel. In fact, the beginning of his life, his birth story, is a miraculous story as well. This is told to us in Judges chapter 13. So let's read this together. Chapter 13, verse 3. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, you are barren and have not borne children, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be called a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Okay, so the birth story of Samson is miraculous. That's his mother that the angel of the Lord would visit and say, yes, you've been barren, but you're going to have a son, and the son is going to be set apart. The word there it gives us is Nazarite. Now, in ancient Israel, they had the priestly class, the priestly family. This is from the line of Levi, the family of Aaron, and they're set apart, consecrated to God for a specific purpose. They perform the priestly duties. A Nazarite is, you might say, similar to that, but a voluntary position. You would make a vow to be a Nazarite. Now, there's 3 main things that goes along with a Nazarite. Number 1, you would not touch a dead body. No touching of a dead body for a Nazarite. Number 2, you would not drink any strong drink. No alcohol for a Nazarite. And number 3, you would not cut your hair. Take no razor to your hair. So these are long-haired Nazarites who have been devoted to the Lord. And Samson, in fact, doesn't even make this decision himself. It's kind of made for him, and he becomes a Nazarite from birth. The angel even tells his mom to start some of these practices leading into the life of Samson. The last thing it says there in these few verses kind of sets the stage for where Samson's life is going. It says that he will begin to help save the people from the oppressive hand of the Philistines. Now, if you can remember, when they came into the promised land, there were other nations there. The Philistines were one such nation that stood against the people. And in this particular time, the life of Samson, in fact, the Philistines were at a higher place, a more dominant place than the Israelites. They oppressed them. They lorded over them. They had the upper hand in this battle that would go back and forth for, in fact, many centuries. But in this period of time, the Israelites are down low. The Philistines have the upper hand. And somehow, in some way, Samson's life is going to help, it says, begin to turn this over. So we're going to see how this happens. What I'd like to do is tell the story of Samson. So I'm not going to read all of this. We're going to check out a few verses along the way. I want to encourage you, if you could, spend a few moments in Judges 13 to 16. You can read the whole story. But this past week, as I was refamiliarizing myself with this story, something came to mind. So when I was a kid, my mom, her job at the time was to keep other kids. She was like a daycare center at her own house. So she was able to work from home. And I remember a lot of the kids would come after school hours. And so during school, it was a more quiet group. So before I was old enough to get to school, it was like me and my younger brother and just like 1 or 2 other kids. And my mom had time, and she watched these stories on the TV. Now, I can remember the name of one. It was called General Hospital. Anyone familiar with these soap operas? Be honest. There we go. There was a lot of them. These soap operas. And these stories, now I was a kid and watching, I don't know what was going on, but as I come to learn, they tell the most bizarre, amazing, astonishing, crazy stories. And every day you find out, okay, someone had an evil twin, or someone was dead. Oh, we thought they were dead, but they were not. They were in a coma, now they're back alive. Or someone had an affair, or someone got shot, or someone... It is just an ongoing, these are these daytime soap operas. I don't even know if these are still a thing. Are these still going today? Okay. I'm not recommending them. I'm just saying I know what they are. And I've thought of soap operas when I thought about Samson's life. Now, as I tell this story, you're going to think, okay, yeah, this does sound indeed like a soap opera. There's a lot of pretty crazy things that happen with Samson. So are we ready to jump into Samson's life? Here we go. So it jumps over. We know he's born. The next thing is he's old enough to get married. He's a young man. Samson decides he wants to marry this woman from a town nearby. The town, I wrote it down, Timnah is the name of the town. And this woman that he wants to marry, he's kind of, you might say, lusting after her. He's following her with his eyes. And this woman is a Philistine. So you got the Israelites, what Samson is, and then you have the Philistines who are like the enemies. Well, for some reason, he's decided he wants to be with this Philistine woman. So he falls in love with her, or so to say, falls in love with her, wants to be with her, wants to marry her. And so he's traveling to her town. Now, on this journey to the town to see this woman, he encounters a lion. Now, this lion attacks him, but he, with his bare hands and his superhuman strength, defeats the lion, rips that lion apart, kills the lion with his bare hands. So you can just imagine the superhuman strength it would take to do that. I saw a lion just this past year when we were at the zoo, and it's like, this is a magnificent creature. Samson kills a lion with his bare hands. So he continues on the road. He makes it to town. He spends time with his woman. He comes back home. On the way home, same road, same path, he sees the lion. It's dead. He sees the carcass of the lion. Now, if it were me and I see the carcass of the lion, you can imagine, you ever pass by a dead animal on the side of a road? It doesn't smell great. I would kind of want to go on the other side. But Samson goes to the carcass, and he notices there's been a hive of bees that have made their home now in the carcass of the lion and are making honey in the lion. Yeah, I love the looks. This is soap opera stuff. So Samson decides, again, if I see this, I'm like running, because I don't want to get stung by some lion-infested bee, or however that works. Samson scoops his hand in the lion, gets some honey. for a little snack for his travels. Starts eating the honey. He takes it back home, and then it says he offers some to his parents, and he doesn't tell his parents where he got the honey. So parents, if your kids come home with honey, just ask some questions. This is Samson. Eats the honey from the lion. Now, the next moment of the story, again, we're jumping around a little bit, but not too much. He's now ready to go back to marry this woman from Timnah who's a Philistine. So he's on the way back to city Timnah. He gets there, and then there's kind of like you might call it a wedding party, 30 companions, it says, that are provided for him. So these are most likely mostly Philistines who know this woman. They were friends with her or family members or something like that. Samson is coming into town to marry this woman, and so there's going to be a feast. Right? For us, we think of weddings and it's like, an hour long and then you have a party. And this was like a multiple day feast. This was the context, the culture of this day and age. So they're there, they have these 30 companions, and they're having this feast, they're having this wedding. Samson decides that he wants to present a riddle to the people. He has a riddle for them. So he's going to give them this riddle, and here's the stakes of the riddle. So he's going to give the riddle to these 30 companions that have been given to him to serve as like groomsmen and best man, that kind of thing. He gives them this riddle. Now, if the 30 people solve the riddle, right? So if Samson loses, Samson would have to provide 30 garments of clothes. That's the price. Now you may think, well, that's not that high of a price. Well, it is in this day and age. They didn't have 30 garments of clothes. They might have 1 or 2, maybe 3 if you're rich. But to get 30 garments of clothes is quite the task. Likewise, if Samson were to stump them and they couldn't answer, then they would have to provide 30 garments to him, which essentially would be all of their clothes, these 30 guys. So here's the riddle. It tells us this. This is Judges chapter 14, verse 14. It says it this way. And he said to them, Samson, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. Now for us, you may be going, okay, why does that sound familiar? Well, Samson did just kill a lion and then eat honey out of the lion. This is what the riddle is about, what Samson has just done. But the people have no idea of this story. They don't know what this means. They can't solve it. It says for 3 days, they're wrestling, trying to figure out what in the heck is Samson talking about. They don't want to give up the 30 garments of clothes. So here's what they decide to do. These Philistines, these companions, go to Samson's soon-to-be or new wife, new bride, and they say, hey, listen, can you entice Samson and get the answer and then tell us and then we can know the answer and solve the riddle? And this woman goes along with them, essentially you might say betraying Samson, gives them the answer to the riddle, and they come and they give the answer. They say, oh, this is what it's about. And Samson loses the bet. So what does Samson do? Again, when I was reading this, I was like, man, this is crazy, because I remember reading about Samson and hearing about Samson as a kid, and I don't remember all of these stories in Vacation Bible School. Samson leaves, goes to a town nearby that's filled with Philistines, kills 30 Philistine men, takes their garments, returns to present them as his payment for the wager. Now, in the meantime, I don't know how long that took, but when he returns, the woman, his wife, has left. She doesn't want to be with him anymore, and it says that she runs off with his best man. Again, soap opera kind of stuff. Samson is distraught. He's upset. He's mad. He's angry. He leaves. He calms down. He would return. Perhaps with a more level head, he returns back to Timnah. He's going to try to talk again with his wife, this woman who has left him, I guess his ex-wife, patch things up. How are we doing? We keeping up? Patch things up. He encounters this woman's dad, and he says, thank you. We don't want anything to do with you, Samson. We don't like you. We don't trust you. We don't want you. You're not part of our family. You're not part of our community, our nation. We don't want you around. You do not have my blessing. Samson, of course, gets irritated. And Samson does the wildest thing. He catches, it says, 300 foxes, which already it's like, how do you catch 300 foxes? He catches 300 foxes, takes torches, he ties the fox tails to the torches. So 2 foxes tied together around a torch in the middle. Can you envision it? Everybody got it? Then he sets them free. So imagine what's going to happen now with these foxes that are fighting at each other, pulling it one direction and the other, trying to get free, running about town with a torch tied between them. Samson causes tremendous havoc in the city, in the fields, in this community, with these foxes causing fires all over the place. So the people of the town respond. They don't like that this has happened. And in fact, they decide, instead of being just super angry at Samson, they're also angry at the woman and her dad for causing this by rejecting Samson. And so the people of the town go and they kill the daughter and the dad. Samson returns home again. The Philistines would come with an army to the land of Judah, his hometown, where he lives, the land of Canaan. They come and they're upset. And now the people of Judah, says the men of Judah are going, what has happened? Like, we thought we were in good standing. Again, this is the Israelites who are kind of overshadowed by the Philistines. They're the dominant force, so they don't want to cause trouble. They're trying to just live and have peace. They're not trying to cause trouble. Samson, what have you done? What have you caused? What's going on here? They've come, they're angry with Samson. And so the men of Judah, his own people, rise up. It says 3,000 of them bind Samson, tie him up with great tight ropes and straps. He is bound. And they say, hey, listen, we're not going to punish you. We're not going to kill you, but we're going to send you back with them. Now, they might punish you. They might kill you, but your blood is not on our hands. But you've caused too many problems. We're sending you back with these Philistines. So on the way back, you can imagine what happens. The ropes, the straps, they cannot contain the strength of Samson. He breaks them, snaps them, looks on the ground, finds a jawbone of a donkey. Then he uses that to kill 1,000 Philistines. Samson slaughters 1,000 Philistines. The enemy, mind you, with the jawbone of a donkey. I remember when I was a kid reading that, thinking that was the coolest thing ever. I did. I'll be honest. As a young boy, I was like, man, maybe one day I'm going to follow Jesus all the way to this donkey bone on the ground and pick it up, and I'm going to kill a bunch of people that aren't with me. I remember thinking these things. Samson was strong and mighty. Now, as the Samson story starts to wind down, one more story. He would visit a city. The main city of the Philistines was the city of Gaza. He would visit Gaza, and what takes him to Gaza is he went to see a prostitute. Yeah, again, this is Samson that I grew up kind of admiring from Vacation Bible School. He goes to visit a prostitute in Gaza. Again, if you can think, following the lust of his eyes, the passion of his flesh. What he sees is what he wants. He goes after it. This has been the pattern of Samson's life. He goes to Gaza to visit a prostitute, and the people there think, okay, we can finally capture Samson. We can bind him when he's vulnerable. We're going to come early in the morning when he's half asleep. We know where he is, and we're going to be able to overtake him. Well, Samson, it says, stays up all night, goes to the gate of the city, rips the gate of the city out of the ground, takes it up a tall hill, and escapes out of their midst. They cannot capture Samson, who has caused so much problems for the Philistines. He visits another town. I'm not going to throw all these different town names out. He visits another town and finds a woman named Delilah. Now, many people, when you hear of Samson, you think of Delilah. They kind of go together. They're in even modern pop songs, Samson and Delilah. That's this interesting pair, Samson and Delilah. Now, Delilah, this woman that he finds and falls in love with, is also, guess what, a Philistine. Once again, falling in love with a woman of the other group, the other people, the enemy group, the Philistines. He falls in love with Delilah. And so here's what happens with Delilah. Her companions, her friends, her co-conspirators, if you will, other Philistine men, they come to Delilah and say, listen, Samson has fallen in love with you. He's listening to you. He trusts you. He wants to be with you. Why don't you get him to tell you the source of his strength? Get him to tell you how he's so strong. Then we can figure out how to overtake or manipulate that, and then we can subdue him. And so she asks Samson, what's the source of your strength? And he makes up a story. He talks about a certain type of strap, and if you use this strap, it'll bind him and he won't be able to get free, and they can overtake him. And so the men, she tells the other Philistines immediately, betraying Samson's trust immediately. The men come to try to get Samson. They try what she says. He breaks free. It doesn't work. And she's like, Samson, why? You lied to me. Now this story, right, you lied to me. This story happens 3 times in a row. 3 times Delilah goes to Samson and says, what's the source of your strength? He tells a story. He makes up a lie. She then tells the Philistines, then they come and try it, and then he breaks free and they don't capture him. So you would think that Samson would kind of figure out what's going on here, that he would be wise to the story, but he stays there with Delilah, stays there in enemy territory, if you will, while all this takes place. Finally, a fourth time, Delilah kind of pours her heart out and says, Samson, you've been lying to me. You're not honest with me. Don't you trust me? I'm thinking, no, he probably shouldn't trust you, but here we are. A fourth time. And it says it this way, Judges chapter 16, verse 17. And he, Samson, told her all his heart and said to her, a razor has come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. He finally opens up and tells the truth to Delilah. If my head is shaved, the source of my strength, all my muscles, all my might will leave me, and I will be just like any other man. And immediately Delilah lulls Samson to sleep. He lays on her lap. She kind of rubs his hair, rubs his back. He goes to sleep. And then in the quiet of that moment, she calls over the Philistines again to say, hey, this is the answer. This, I believe, is the true answer. And while he's sleeping, the Philistines take a razor to his head, cut off his hair. Now, in that moment, she wakes him up. Samson, the Philistines are here to get you. And he wakes up ready to fight, and yet he's overtaken. His strength has left him. He realizes he's no longer superhumanly strong. The Philistines overtake him. The first thing they do is they gouge his eyes out. Again, this is a tragic tale. They gouge his eyes out. These same eyes that have led him in the passions of the flesh and of lust of his heart, these eyes that have led him to the wrong places a few different times now have been gouged out. He can no longer see. He's subdued. He's taken into custody. He's taken in as a prisoner, and they lead him away to the city of Gaza, back to Gaza, one of the popular capital cities there for the Philistines. He's put into prison and made to work, kind of work the mines and break the rocks, if you will. Time, his hair begins to grow back slowly. Now they have this great festival. They have this great party, this great celebration there in Gaza, and they have it at the temple for their god, whose name is Dagon. We meet the god Dagon, a false god of the Philistines there in Hebrew, or in Judges chapter 16. And so they have this grand temple with great pillars and columns and colonnades, and there's thousands upon thousands of people that have come out to offer sacrifice to the god of Dagon because the Philistines have finally captured this man Samson, who has wreaked havoc on their lives for some 20 years. They finally captured Samson, they've subdued him, they've gouged his eyes out, he's bound and he's in prison, and they bring him out to entertain them. Essentially, to entertain them is that he's put on display, and they mock him and they laugh at him. This man who was once so strong, who we couldn't capture, and all this stuff, this man is now subdued. This man is now in prison. This man is now blind. Samson, blinded now, asks the servant that brings him out to lean him up against this great column. And then Samson would pray one last time, Lord, give me this strength back. And in a great push, he pushes these columns down of this temple to Dagon, and it says the whole structure falls down. It says it kills thousands of Philistines. In fact, it says it kills more Philistines in that moment than he had killed in all the time during his lifetime. And it kills someone else, of course. It killed also Samson. Samson dies in this moment. He dies in the rubble of the temple of Dagon, killing thousands, multiple thousands of these Philistines as they worship this false god. And he prays for strength. He pushes the columns down. It all comes crashing. And there's Samson, the end of the story of Samson. It's kind of a tragic tale. I'm not quite sure how to feel about it as I read through it. This judge who was seeking to follow God and follow Yahweh and do things the right way, but had some wrong motives at times and went the wrong way at times, but had great strength, and he watched over the people, but he also caused problems. This was the end of the story of Samson. Now, this would not be the end of the story of the Philistines. Their time continued for many hundreds of years. In fact, after this, through the time of the judges, into the time with King Saul and King David and King Solomon, Even the prophets, some of them would write about the Philistines. In fact, when David is growing up, he would fight the great giant Goliath. We've heard of Goliath? Goliath was a Philistine. This is from the same group of people, just to give you a reference. The Philistines would cause problems for the Israelites for many years to come after the life of Samson. So, of course, again, did Samson accomplish what he was trying to accomplish? Now, I grew up hearing of Samson's great strength. And as a young boy, as I said, I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to be strong and mighty and use my great muscles for the Lord. And if I needed to kill the enemy, then so be it. I remember thinking this as a child. Now, I didn't fully understand, of course, what I was saying, what I was thinking. I just remember going up to the front of Sunday school and having paper shoved under my shirt that I might have great muscles like Samson. I wanted to be just like Samson. The challenge for this story is great because for us, as we read and seek to learn Scripture, there are times when we want to emulate people in the Bible, of course, because they are in the Bible. So they are biblical. These biblical characters, you got Noah and Abraham and Moses and Joshua and Samson and David and Solomon, and we want to emulate these ones in the Scriptures, in the Bible, and be biblical because they are biblical, because they're part of the story of the Scripture. And this can present great challenges to us because as we seek to be like they are when they're good, when they do things well, when they do things right, what we end up doing is we end up being like them when they're bad, when they mess up, when they sin and fall short, when they do the wrong things. And so we have these people we want to emulate, look into the Scriptures, and sometimes we end up emulating the wrong people for the wrong reasons. Now, in culture today, there's a topic that comes up often, and maybe you've heard this before. Here's the topic: toxic masculinity. Anyone heard of that? Now, depending on your worldview and what news channel you watch and that kind of thing, you might have different opinions on what toxic masculinity is, but it is something that is discussed. Samson might be a character that you might talk about when that subject comes up. And so as a response, of course, Christians or the church, this is now talked about within our circle. So we say, okay, if some masculinity is toxic, then what does it mean to be a biblical man? Right? What does it mean to be a godly man? So godly masculinity or godly manhood. Now this, of course, is where Christians will journey into the Bible, as I've said, and find different characters that they kind of identify with, that they like. And they might go and find a Samson or an Abraham or a Peter or a Joshua or a Paul, or they might find any number of characters and say, okay, I want to be like this person and do things the way they did them because they're a biblical character. And that will lead me to be a godly man or perhaps a godly woman. And so perhaps we need to be like Samson, who is strong and use his great strength to kill his enemies. Maybe sometimes that's what we're supposed to do. This, of course, leads us to a great dilemma. Now, like everyone else, Samson is part of a larger story. Samson's not the main character. And I say praise God that Samson's not the main character. But he is in the story, but he's part of a greater story that's leading to something better. Now, in the New Testament, the book of Hebrews, in chapter 11, the writer of Hebrews gives us this long list of Old Testament characters, Old Testament figures. These great figures like David and Abraham and Moses, and they list their names, and they list kind of these attributes and things they did great, and they had great faith, and some people call it the Hall of Faith, right? Like the Hall of Fame, but the Hall of Faith for the Old Testament. Hebrews 11 gives all these names, and they're recognizing these people from the story along the way and their contributions to the story. Now, these are important. These are significant. And I want to read a portion of this, the second half portion of this, and I want us to understand the significance of what the writer of Hebrews is trying to get us to understand. So we're going to pick up in Hebrews chapter 11, and we're going to end at the very beginning of chapter 12. So let's follow along. Verse 32. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, there he is, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. This is the story of the Old Testament. But listen to verse 39 here. All of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. Chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and every sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Amen? The writer of Hebrews breaks down this big epic story as best as he or she can, whoever the writer is, of all these Old Testament characters, men and women, and the many commendable things that they do, and the struggles that they face, and the challenging circumstances they find themselves in, and the tests of faith that they walk through. All of these things are wonderful and challenging and commendable, it says. But he's clear, this writer of Hebrews, to tell us that God has promised us something better. As we seek to find out what it means to be a godly man or a godly woman, we cannot just go into the Bible and open it up and say, let me find what character I want to find, that I want to identify with, that I like the most for this certain moment, and say, I'm going to live like them. We can't just say, I'm going to do this one like Joshua and this one over here like Abraham. And for this moment, I'm going to be like Samson. We are not able to do that because the promise of God was not fully given through any of those. They were important and they played their role in the story, but the story is leading to one central character, the main character. And this, of course, is Jesus. It says Jesus is better. God has given us something better to look to emulate. And so for me as a kid, as I'm looking to emulate the life of Samson because he's big and strong, the truth is, as I've grown older, I've come to realize that for me to truly look like God and live a life that is godly and Christ-like, I must live like Jesus. Do the things that Jesus has taught me, the way that Jesus has shown me. For all of us, as we seek to understand what it means to be a Christian, a Christ follower, is to look to the life of Jesus. All these men and women did great things. I don't want to dismiss any of them. Imagine that I wouldn't have been as great as any of them, and my part of the story would have been so small. I commend them for their part of the story, but they serve as signposts pointing to Jesus, the true and full fulfillment of God, the presence and peace of God upon the earth. The Logos, the divine understanding of God, as John writes, is Jesus Christ. Now, Samson is an important story that it should give us caution. He was guided by his lust and his rage, and it got him into trouble. And what often happened was he multiplied his enemy's anger. This happens again and again in the life of Samson. His enemy does something that angers him, he retaliates. Then they retaliate. Then he retaliates. Then they retaliate. This goes back and forth, and it escalates the problem higher and higher and higher. This, by the way, is the pattern of the world that is still true today. Retaliation keeps raising the tide of anger. And if someone does something to you, you've got to get them back, and they're going to get you back. And this is the way of the world. And Jesus speaks against this. Jesus speaks of his kingdom. And in his kingdom, he says we are to not get revenge on our enemy, not kill our enemy with the jawbone of a donkey, We are to love our enemy. We are to forgive our enemies. We are to lift them up. He says anyone would love their own kind. Anyone would love their own people. But for us who are called and set apart, who want to follow after Jesus Christ, who want to represent him and his light and his love to the world, we do things his way. And so we learn from Samson. We learn from the story. We see the moments God uses him and speaks through him and the great things he might do, but we understand it's a sign pointing to something greater, to something better. It's a sign pointing to Jesus. And so if you want to be a person that looks like Jesus, who follows after Jesus, who's the kind of man or the right kind of woman, true strength comes from compassion, which is stronger than anger. It's easy to get angry. It's easy to get angry. I don't know what it is that causes you anger, but there's something there. Sometimes it's when you sit in traffic. Sometimes it's when you get in an argument with your spouse, when your kids do something you don't want them to do, when your neighbor's not as kind as you'd hope. It's easy to get angry. It's easy to look at the world around you and get angry and then respond in that same anger. That does nothing. Forgiveness is stronger than revenge. Again, it's easy to get revenge. When someone does something to you, if you want to get them back, that's the way of the world. That's the way of many people throughout the Old Testament. In the story, there's revenge after revenge. And if we want to search the Bible and find a story of revenge, we can, but our attempt, our hope is to look like Jesus. Forgiveness is much, much more difficult than revenge. And lastly, of course, love is stronger than hate. The world and our political parties and our cable news channels and everyone is going to try to fan the flame of hate and anger and violence. It can rally a crowd. It can cause us to unite together. But true courage is love in the face of those things. It's not picking up a jawbone of a donkey and killing your enemy. True courage is to love your enemy. To go 2 miles when they ask you to go 1 mile. To turn the other cheek. To give them more than they've even asked for. These radical things Jesus challenges us with. This is who I want to be as a person. This is who I want us to be as a church. And so I'm thankful for Samson. I'm thankful for his life and his ministry and how he carries on the story. And I pray that we would be just a part of the story along the way. But I pray our part of the story, when they look to us, would say, man, that looks like Jesus. I want to look like Jesus. I want our church to look like Jesus. May that be our challenge. Amen.